Hi, I'm Delara. That night started like any other, at least that's what I told myself. My parents had invited me over, calling it a family dinner. Just the four of us, nothing unusual. Or so I thought. But by the time dessert was halfway gone, the truth spilled out like bitter wine staining a white tablecloth. They told me calmly, almost casually, that they were giving my house, the house I had worked for, paid for, poured my soul into, over to my sister. The golden daughter, as they so proudly called her. They really believed I would smile, swallow the insult, and stay quiet just like I always had. They mistook my silence for weakness. What they didn't know was that I had the receipts. Literally. Every payment, every repair, every drop of sweat that went into making those walls stand tall mine. So I asked myself, why did they need me to build it only to pretend I never belonged there? If erasing me from my own story was that easy, what else had they been hiding all along? This isn't where my story ends. Not where they thought it would. Stay with me. I was at my kitchen counter that afternoon, half distracted by the glow of a project render on my laptop when Mom's text came in. Just 10 plain words. No emojis, no half-hearted jokes, no guilt-tripping reminders about being the daughter who never visits. Family dinner. We want everyone together. It's important. Come home. The words sat on my screen like they'd been rehearsed, deliberate, polished. It wasn't the wording that unsettled me. It was the tone. Too clean. Too formal. My mother never sent messages like that. I read it again. And again. Come home. But home didn't mean the house I'd been living in for almost 8 years now. That house, my house, was modest, but mine. Every inch of it bore my fingerprints, my choices, my story. I'd refinished the hardwood floors myself late nights with sandpaper and aching knees. The dining room crown molding me, teaching myself from YouTube tutorials. The sage green walls in the kitchen, I chose that shade after a brutal year at work, craving something calm, something that felt like breathing again. Every corner carried a piece of me. My resilience, my independence, my survival. But when Mom said come home, she meant their house. The one in Lexington. The place that always felt less like family and more like enemy lines. Still old habits die hard. I didn't go with hope. Not even curiosity. Just that old reflex of being the daughter who never arrived angry, just arrived. I threw on jeans, a clean sweater, and drove without music. My chest was tight the whole way. The moment I pulled into their driveway, I knew something was wrong. The porch was dressed up with bright pots of mums, too perfect, too new. The windows glowed with the warm flicker of candles, the kind Mom only lit when she wanted to impress or when she had something unpleasant to soften. Inside, everything was staged. The dining table was set like a magazine spread, cloth napkins folded into swan's wine glasses, already breathing. Lasagna, garlic knots, Caesar salad, even a bottle of red, my favorite, waiting uncorked. Mom Iris was wearing pearls and lipstick. She never wore lipstick unless she was playing a role or delivering bad news. Dad Orlan barely looked up. Just a curt nod in my direction, his eyes sliding to the dining room as if I were late to a performance I never auditioned for. And there she was, Melis, my sister, perfect as ever. Her hair sleek, her nails manicured, her glass of wine already half drained. She lifted it with a smirk and said, "Oh, good. We were just saying how quiet the house felt before you walked in." Her version of humor. Her version of welcome. We sat. We passed bread. We talked about traffic, weather, work, nothing real. Nothing that mattered. Not once did they ask about my house, the one I had been living in, the one I had made into something beautiful after years of sacrifice. The same house they had once let me stay in when in truth I had carried every bill, every repair, every burden on my own. By the time I lifted my second forkful of lasagna, the air around the table shifted. Something was coming. Mom straightened in her chair, her pearls catching the candlelight. The smile she gave was polished perfect, but too stiff to be real. It wasn't warmth. It was performance. She set her wine glass down with a delicate clink that seemed louder than it should have been in the silence that followed. "We've made a decision." She began, her voice even rehearsed. "Your father and I about the house." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. The pasta still sat heavy in my stomach, but suddenly the warmth of it drained away, leaving only cold weight. Dad cleared his throat. His hands stayed folded on the table, eyes fixed on the Caesar salad bowl like it might save him from looking at me. His voice was low, deliberate. It's time to make things official. We've decided to transfer the house to Melis. For a moment, I blinked. That was all I could do. The fork in my hand stilled midair as though even my body refused to move. Melis tilted her head, her hair sliding over one shoulder, her lips curving into a smile that was soft only on the surface. Underneath it was pure condescension. "It just makes sense," she said sweetly, as though she were explaining something obvious to a child. "You're always busy on the move, chasing one project after another. I'm settled. Stable. It's just easier this way." Easier. As though all the years I had lived there, sacrificed there, built there, meant nothing but inconvenience. I didn't respond. I couldn't. It was as if someone had shoved my head underwater and the world had gone muffled and slow. This house, my home, being passed across the table like a breadbasket. A casual decision, a family business transaction. Nobody asked if I was okay with it. Nobody acknowledged the years I poured into paying down the mortgage, the roof repairs I covered when a storm ripped shingles clean off, the weekends I spent painting walls, the hours I spent replacing old plumbing, the insurance bills I never missed. Not a single word. It was already done, already decided. I looked at my mother. She smiled like a queen who had delivered her decree and expected applause. I turned to my father, his eyes still locked on the salad as if he couldn't bear the weight of mine. And then there was Melis, taking another delicate sip of her wine before setting the glass down just so. She met my gaze with a sweetness sharp enough to cut. "Of course," she said lightly. "You're welcome to stay through the holidays." My lips pulled into a smile that didn't touch my eyes. Small, cold. "No worries," I said quietly. "I'm not that hungry anymore." I stood the chair, scraping against the floor louder than any of their voices. I walked into the hallway, slipping my coat from its hook. I could feel all three pairs of eyes on me, but none of them spoke. Not a protest. Not a question. Not even my name. The front door clicked shut behind me. The cool night air hit my face like a wake-up call, clearing the fog that had wrapped itself around me at the table. I got into my car, started the engine, and just sat there staring at the steering wheel, listening to its quiet hum. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then, in barely more than a whisper, I said it out loud to the empty car. I guess I was never really part of their picture. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, the sky had faded into that muted, stormy gray that makes the night feel heavier than it is. I didn't go inside right away. I just sat in the car engine, running silence, stretching out like a verdict. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't ask, it decides. Finally, I stepped out, walked to the front door. My key slipped into the lock with muscle memory more than thought. The air inside was still everything exactly where I had left it. And yet, as I looked around, nothing felt familiar anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry either. I just lay on the couch, shoes still on, staring at the ceiling as shadows drifted across the plaster, carrying my thoughts. Places I hadn't dared go in years. Over and over the words replayed. That table. That smile. That sentence. "We're transferring the house to Melis." Each time it echoed in my mind, it landed heavier. The next morning, sunlight forced its way through the blinds like an intruder, harsh and insistent, demanding I face the day whether I wanted to or not. I rose, slowly made coffee, tried to shake the weight clinging to my shoulders like wet wool. It wouldn't leave. At 10 a.m., there was a knock at the door. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the peephole. And of course, it was her. Melis, standing there in her tailored coat, 2 cups of coffee in hand, wearing that smile she reserved for moments when she was stepping on your neck but expected you to thank her for the massage. I opened the door halfway. "Didn't know you were coming. I figured you might need this," she said, holding up one of the cups like a peace offering. Rough night. I didn't answer, just took the cup from her hand and stepped aside. She walked in without hesitation, as if the threshold had already been signed over to her. sat down on the edge of my sofa, legs crossed, her eyes scanning the room like she was already redecorating it in her head. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about a house. It was about erasure. I get that this is a lot. Melis began, her voice honeyed, practiced. She leaned back into the sofa, casually adjusting the throw pillow behind her like she was settling into her space, not mine. Change can feel abrupt, but this doesn't have to be hard. I stayed standing, arms crossed, watching her. Hard, I repeated, my tone, flat, deliberate. She rushed to soften it, lifting her hands slightly as if to calm a child. I just mean transitions. They're tough. I'm not here to make it worse. She smiled, too polished to be real. You can stay here for now. Of course, until you figure things out. That sentence landed like a slap. Figure things out. I echoed not a question, but a mirror. I let the words hang between us, heavy, damp, rotting, like forgotten laundry left in the wash. Unbothered, she took a sip of her coffee, savoring it as if she owned even the silence. I mean, obviously, we'll need to make some arrangements eventually, but there's no rush. You've got time. Her tone was soothing, practiced, like a landlord comforting a tenant who couldn't pay rent. I nodded once. Not agreement restraint. I walked into the kitchen, placed the untouched coffee on the counter, and let my hand rest on the cool surface. It trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the sheer effort of holding back. She lingered another 10 minutes, talking about nothing, filling the room with her presence, as if to mark her territory. At one point, she even offered so casually to help clean out the back room. The implication clear. As though my life, my belongings were cluttered to be cleared away. When she finally floated out the door, she left behind a chirpy, "Let me know if you need anything." The door clicked shut. My jaw tightened. The exhale that left my body wasn't a sigh, it was a warning. Around 4 that afternoon, my phone rang. Mom. For a moment, I debated not answering. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. But old habits die hard. I answered. She didn't even say hello. I hope Melis was helpful today. She stopped by, I said flatly. She just wants the best for you. You know how she is. I leaned against the kitchen counter, eyes drifting to the row of framed photographs on the wall. Christmas dinners, summer barbecues, birthdays, every memory lined up neatly in glossy frames. And every single one had the same thing in common. I wasn't there. Or if I was blurred in the background, cropped at the edge, or holding the camera. Always outside the frame. Always convenient, but never central. Mom's voice softened, but the words themselves sliced clean. You've been allowed to live there for so long. We just thought it was time to let someone with real commitment manage it. Real commitment. The phrase burned like acid on my tongue. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood. We didn't want it to be a shock, she added quickly, as if last night's ambush dressed up in marinara and wine glasses wasn't a carefully staged betrayal. So let me get this straight, I said slowly, my voice cold. Nothing I did for this house counts. At all. There was a pause. A beat too long. It's not about that, she said finally. You helped, yes, but the house was never yours. It's ours, always has been. The floor beneath me didn't move, but suddenly the world tilted. Got it, I said, calm but clipped. That's helpful. At least now I don't have to guess. I ended the call before she could respond. The phone slid from my hand to the counter with deliberate gentleness. Then I turned and walked into my office. My feet carried me to the file cabinet in the corner like they already knew the path. My fingers found the folder without searching. A thick tan envelope. Heavy. Familiar. I unsealed it and laid the contents across my desk. Mortgage agreements. Transfer of ownership forms. Tax statements. All in my name. All bearing my signature. Line after line of undeniable proof. I sat there for a long time, motionless. The papers spread before me like fragments of a puzzle that never belonged to them in the first place. They weren't just paper. They were evidence. Proof that I hadn't imagined my place in this house. Proof that my sweat, my money, my choices had built it into something solid. Proof that my name mattered even if they'd done their best to erase it. And as I stared down at the signatures, I felt the cruelest truth settle into me. They hadn't overlooked me. They'd known all along. They just counted on me never digging deep enough to confront it. I rose slowly, the weight of the silence pressing against me as I moved through the house. Each step echoed like a reminder this place had been my sanctuary, my anchor. And now they were trying to strip it from me with a smile. I reached my bedroom and opened the cabinet tucked into the corner, the one no one else knew about. Inside were the backup files. Every document I had ever scanned, digitized, tucked away just in case. Back then, it had felt excessive paranoid even. Who makes digital copies of utility bills and renovation contracts? Me. And in that moment, it no longer felt like overkill. It felt like armor, the only armor I had left. I carried the laptop to the kitchen table and powered it on. The familiar hum filled the stillness, a sound I hadn't realized I needed. Folder after folder opened, and then there it was. My name, not in passing, not once, but everywhere. Loan approvals, utility transfers, contractor invoices, renovation agreements. Every line marked with my signature. Every page a testament. Each date pulled memories to the surface, sharp and vivid. One in particular seared into me. The spring I had canceled my trip to Oregon, something I'd been planning for months because the roof needed replacing and no one else could handle it. I had told myself it was just what the responsible daughter did. The reliable one. The one who didn't cause problems, who didn't complain, who just fixed what needed fixing. But staring at the evidence now, I understood. That wasn't reliability. That was sacrifice. And it had been used against me. My phone buzzed. A message from Jenna, a college friend I hadn't spoken to in months. No context, no greeting. Just a link and 3 words. "Is this you?" I tapped it open. A screenshot appeared glowing harsh on the screen. A Facebook post. Public. From my mother's account. Some people forget who gave them everything, and now they're trying to take what was never theirs. The comments were a chorus of strangers who thought they knew me. Ungrateful kids are the worst. She should be thankful she even had a place to stay. "You raised her too soft, Iris. That's why she acts like this." I blinked, but the words didn't blur. They landed with precision heavy as stones, burying me under a narrative they had crafted. It wasn't just that they were taking credit. It was worse. They were painting me as a thief, a parasite. Someone clawing at what didn't belong to me when all along I was the one who had held it together so it didn't collapse. I didn't reply to Jenna, didn't comment, didn't react. Instead, I opened a new email, attached the scanned deed, and left the subject line blank. In the body, I typed one single sentence. "Please review for action if necessary. No rush yet." Then I sent it to my attorney, the one who had helped me once before during a contractor dispute. A man who was practical, professional, allergic to drama. The kind of person you turn to when the people who hurt you insisted it was for your own good. When the email whooshed away, I closed the laptop. My hands rested on the cover for a long second before I pushed back from the table. I walked to the hallway drawer, opened it, and pulled out a single white candle. I lit it. Not for peace. Not for comfort. But because I needed the room to hold something I had chosen. A symbol. A reminder that even in this storm, there was still something within my control. The flame flickered small but stubborn, and I sat in its glow, letting my thoughts unspool. Not drifting to the past that was already written. Forward. To what came next. To the lines I would draw. To the things I would no longer allow. To what I might have to do if they dared push again. Another vibration pulled me back. The phone lit up on the counter. I braced for fallout, a call, a demand, another backhanded justification for their betrayal. But it wasn't that. It was an invitation, a digital event. Home celebration hosted by Melis, my address, my house. No RSVP required. I stared at it. My chest didn't heave. My pulse didn't spike. Instead, a calm settled over me, sharp and precise. I didn't delete the invitation. I didn't respond either. I just let it sit there. like a storm cloud on the horizon. Because if they wanted to play this out in public, then they had no idea how prepared I truly was. I just sat there staring at the glowing screen as if the pixels might rearrange themselves into something less absurd, something that didn't scream betrayal. I reread the header again and again, clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, I had misread the location. But no, it was my address, my house. The house I had been paying for repairing, rebuilding piece by piece when everyone else was too busy or too indifferent to care. And yet here it was, announced as if it belonged to someone else. No worse, as if it had always belonged to her. The tone of the invitation made it sound like Malais's domain now, like I had never been more than a temporary guest in my own home. I scrolled further down my throat, tightening with every name on the list. Family friends, distant cousins, even a couple of her real estate clients, people who had never set foot past the front porch before. Their names were neatly typed in one after another as though they had earned their place. Mine wasn't there, not even as an afterthought. But then I saw Iris's comment. Public. Permanent. You're all welcome. We're proud to honor Malais for her grace and leadership in shaping our family home. Leadership. Shaping. Words meant to crown her queen of something she never built. I expected anger to rise in me like fire, but what came instead was colder, sharper. Not rage, not grief, just detachment. A clean surgical kind of pain, like a knife slicing through cloth. Something in me had already detached, as if I were watching a stranger's story, not my own. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house felt foreign already, as though the walls themselves had shifted overnight, repainted by their words. I needed to breathe somewhere they hadn't touched yet. I pulled on my sneakers and left earbuds in, but no music playing, just static to keep the world out. I walked the neighborhood in wide loops, tracing familiar streets that now felt like borders. By the time I rounded back toward my block, cars were already arriving. Too early. Always too eager when it wasn't theirs. Silver sedans, glossy SUVs, even a rented BMW idling at the curb. I watched a woman in heels step out, balancing a hostess gift wrapped in gaudy gold cellophane like a peace offering to a queen. I hadn't expected them to come this soon. My chest tightened. I slipped down the alley and let myself in through the back, grateful I'd left the side gate unlatched. Maybe some part of me knew I'd need an exit that didn't involve pleasantries or plastered smiles. Inside, voices spilled through every room, familiar but foreign in their tone. My kitchen island. My kitchen island was stripped bare now, transformed into a buffet lined with trays I had bought arranged like relics in someone else's exhibit. The lemon pitcher I'd purchased at the summer fair sat like a prop next to champagne flutes filled with cheap fizz. The air smelled of reheated hors d'oeuvres and entitlement. I stayed in the shadows near the stairs watching. The dining room had become a stage. And there she was, Malais, standing at the head of the table, bathed in light as if the house itself had bent to her presence. Cream blouse, wide-legged slacks, that serene, effortless expression she saved for open houses and gala nights. Iris stood beside her, smiling glass raised high. Thank you all for coming. Iris began, her voice thick with pride. This home has seen many seasons, but it has never looked more alive than it does now, and that's all thanks to Malais. Her taste, her vision, her leadership. She brought this place back to life. The room erupted in applause. Glasses clinked. Compliments spilled like confetti. I didn't clap. I didn't move. Because the walls they admired, I painted those brush in hand skin raw from hours of sanding. The backsplash they marveled at. I designed it after spending 3 weekends in tile showrooms, squinting under fluorescent lights, weighing shades of grout like life or death choices. Even the pendant lights above their heads, I had wired those with trembling fingers, praying the circuit wouldn't blow. But now in their mouths, every detail was hers. Memory rewritten. Contribution reassigned. You can really feel Malais's touch in every corner, someone said. I pressed my shoulder against the wall to steady myself. My heartbeat wasn't frantic, it was steady like a drum in a funeral procession. This wasn't about a house anymore. This was about erasure. About watching your own story stripped and dressed on someone else's body. Quietly, I slipped upstairs while the herd moved toward the patio. In my room, the room that had once been mine, I grabbed a denim jacket, shoved my keys into the pocket, and left the way I came. By the time I reached the end of the block, the crowd's laughter still echoing faintly behind me, my phone buzzed. A message from Iris. Just one line. "You're welcome to stop by, just don't make it a scene." And that was the moment I realized what they feared most wasn't losing the house. It was losing control of the story. No greeting, no warmth, not even the polite pretense of small talk, just cold, clipped instruction. That evening, as the sky bruised purple with the last light of dusk, my phone rang again. For a moment, I stared at it, thumb hovering, ready to let it slide into voicemail. But something, a thread of instinct or maybe defiance, told me to pick up. Dilara Mom said, her voice soft, deliberate, the same voice she used when she wanted to sound calm but still keep her hands on the reins. "Let's not drag this out." "Drag what out?" I asked, though I already knew. "The house situation, honey. Let's just make it simple. Sign the papers. Let me take over what she's built." The laugh almost escaped me, bitter and sharp, but I pressed it back down. My voice came out even almost too steady. "You mean what I built?" Silence crackled across the line. She recovered quickly, but the pause was enough to tell me she'd heard the weight in my words. "She's the one maintaining it," she countered. "She's here. You're always off somewhere. This is better for everyone. If you care about this family, you'll stop making everything so hard." That last sentence sat there like a blade on the table, gleaming. A dare. And I took it. "If caring means erasing myself, then I don't," I said. Then I hung up. No hesitation, no waiting for her reply. Because what more could she possibly say that I hadn't already heard 100 times before? Instead, I opened my laptop. Fingers moving almost automatically, I pulled up the security footage from the hallway camera. Quiet. Clear. Time-stamped. Every face captured, every compliment recorded, every claim laid out in full color. Proof, not memory. Evidence, not argument. I forwarded the file to my lawyer, along with the deed, just in case anyone suddenly forgot. When I closed the laptop, I did it slowly, almost ceremonially, as though shutting a door I would never walk back through. The screen dimmed to black, and for a moment I just stared at the faint reflection of my own face. Not angry, not exhausted, just still. The kind of stillness that comes right before a storm gathers. Only this time, I wasn't the one waiting to be struck. I was the one holding the wind. 3 days passed in silence. Not a word from any of them. No texts, no calls. Not even one of Iris's carefully coded Facebook posts designed to stir sympathy and paint herself as the martyr. I knew what that silence meant. It wasn't indifference. It was calculation. Tension strung tight like piano wire. They weren't ignoring me. They were circling, watching, waiting to see what I'd do next. On the 4th morning, my phone rang. Malaeus. I let it vibrate once, twice, letting the sound hang in the air like a test of wills. Finally, I answered. I didn't speak. I didn't give her the courtesy of a greeting. "Dilara," she said, her tone assuming familiarity, assuming weakness. I ended the call without a word. The silence I returned to her was louder than anything I could have said. That evening, as the sun slipped low behind the fence and the light stretched long and thin across the kitchen tiles, I walked into my home office. In the corner sat a black fireproof box I hadn't touched in years. The lock clicked open with a sharp, satisfying snap. Inside everything. Every receipt. Every contractor invoice. Every scanned form. The original deed. The title transfer. Closing disclosures. The kind of paper trail no amount of revisionist memory could erase. I laid them out carefully, one by one. The weight wasn't in the paper itself, but in the repetition my name over and over again across every page. Proof that even when they never said it aloud, I had carved my place into this story. I photographed each document and organized them into a folder. Clean. Precise. Then I opened a new email. Subject line, activate. Body, you've accepted the new arrangement. That was all it needed to say. Smooth, professional, irrefutable. Attached were 24 files. Everything they had tried to bury. I hit send. The whoosh of the email leaving my outbox sounded almost like a release of breath. Later that night, the phone rang again. No greeting, no apology, no regret. Just my mother's voice clipped and certain you've accepted the new arrangement. I let the pause stretch until it became unbearable. I haven't decided what I accept, I said flatly, but I know exactly what I won't tolerate anymore. She scoffed lightly, dismissively, like someone who still thought they had leverage. Delara, you're being unreasonable. It's not that deep. It's just real estate. Just real estate. That was the refrain, always reducing it, stripping it of meaning. As though the years I poured into it, the nights I stayed up balancing numbers, the mornings spent sanding walls and rewiring lights, all of it could be boiled down to bricks and contracts. But I knew better, and now so would they. I replied with one final message to my attorney, proceed with protections as discussed. Let me know if you need anything further. Attached every file, every document, every time-stamped piece of proof. Then I closed the laptop. Not triumphant. Not yet. But I felt it the shift. A weight moving off my chest and settling firmly in my hands. This time I wasn't waiting for their permission to exist. That night, while the rest of the street was dimming into quiet routines, lights flicking off one by one, televisions murmuring through thin walls, I moved silently through the house. My house. Step by step, room by room, I reclaimed it. The locks were first. Front door, back door, side entrance. Each metallic click felt like stitching a wound shut. I didn't rush. I took my time turning the screwdriver with deliberate care as though the act itself was a ritual. By the time I reset the garage code, I could almost feel the walls breathe differently, like they knew finally they belonged to me again. In the mailbox, taped neatly over my nameplate, was a strip of paper. Her last name. Mrs. Not even subtle. She'd already tried to brand it to make it official in her own way. My jaw tightened. I peeled it off slowly, the glue fighting against my fingers, then crumpled it and dropped it in the trash without ceremony. Her claim like the scrap of paper meant nothing here. The next morning, I carried the resolve further. At the post office, I revoked every forwarding instruction she'd put in place. Every assumption they'd made, every little plan to reroute my life without me knowing began to unravel. And I didn't announce it. Not to them, not to anyone. Quietly, methodically, I reclaimed piece by piece what they thought they had stolen. That afternoon, I took the car out more to breathe than to move. The road stretched ahead, calm and unbothered. I stopped for groceries, choosing each item with care. At the register, I added a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a someday. But as I stood there, I realized someday had always been postponed for someone else's needs. Enough. Today was as good a day as any. When I returned bags in hand, the house greeted me differently. Lighter. Not a burden. Not borrowed. Mine. The first crack in their world came quickly. A text from Miss. Hey, why are my keys not working? I read it once. I didn't answer. Left it unopened like the silence itself was the message. Less than an hour later, a voicemail. Iris. Her tone sharpened by outrage, wrapped in false innocence. Is this really what you're doing now? Locking out your family after everything we've done for you? I didn't even blink. I saved it. Forwarded it directly to my attorney and moved on. No reply. No argument. Let them rage into their own echo chamber. By nightfall, the house felt transformed. For the first time in weeks, the silence wasn't oppressive. It was clean-earned. A silence that belonged to me. The locks clicked into place behind me one final time, not to shut the world out, but to seal myself in. I poured the wine into a glass, the liquid catching the dim glow of the lamp beside the window. I sat down, raised the glass, and breathed. Truly breathed the way you do when you realize your lungs have been holding back without your permission. And then the doorbell rang. I set the glass down slowly, almost reverently, and walked to the door. Through the peephole, her face filled the circle. Iris. She wasn't holding flowers, not a peace offering, not even the empty politeness of baked goods. Just a single piece of printer paper folded in half, pressed flat against her chest like a shield. I cracked the door open just enough to make it clear she wasn't stepping inside. She didn't ask to. She didn't even look past me into the home she'd tried to claim. Without a word, she extended the folded sheet. Her hand lingered a second too long, as if reluctant to release it, before she pulled back quickly like my skin might scorch her fingers. "I just thought you should see what everyone else is seeing," she said finally. Her voice was flat transactional, not an invitation, not an explanation. Then she turned, walked back to her car with the stiff finality of someone checking a chore off their list. No backward glance. Engine on. Gone. I shut the door behind me and unfolded the paper slowly, carefully, as though it might cut me. It was a screenshot. Printed. Tangible. A Facebook post hers. Public. It's heartbreaking when your own child disrespects everything you've built for them. Some people forget who carried them through life. Some betrayals come wearing quiet faces. Below a photo. My kitchen. My dining room. And at the center, smiling as though she were queen of the manor, was Miss. Wine glass raised. Behind her iris, one arm draped around her shoulder like they had built the walls together, like they had poured the foundation with their bare hands. The comments were worse than the caption. "Ungrateful generation. She looks just like you, Iris. Grace must run in the family. I always thought the younger one seemed cold. You could just tell. Not one mention of my name. Just allusion enough to invite speculation enough to sharpen the knives without drawing blood in a way that could hold her accountable. It wasn't venting. It wasn't grief. It was calculated. A crafted narrative. A performance for the crowd." I sat at the kitchen table, the paper heavy in my hands, and felt the cold clarity settle over me. They weren't just trying to take the house. They were trying to rewrite the story. And they wanted me erased. One where I was the villain, painted in thick strokes of bitterness and entitlement, while they were the injured saints, selfless martyrs, just trying to keep the family whole. That was the story they wanted to tell. A story people would eagerly swallow because it was simple, dramatic, and easy to repeat at Sunday brunch. But I didn't take the bait. Instead, I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the floor with a sound that felt final, and walked into my office. The door clicked behind me, sealing me in, sealing them out. And there, in the glow of my laptop, I began the quiet work of severing every last tie I hadn't already cut. First, utilities. I logged into the water account, my name still tethered like a forgotten chain. A few keystrokes, a confirmation email, and then gone. Next, electricity. Then the internet. Insurance. Every joint signature, every co-signed responsibility I'd allowed to linger out of guilt, out of habit, out of that old reflex of being the dependable one. I deleted them one by one. Not angrily, not frantically, methodically. Like pulling weeds from a garden that I finally wanted to see bloom. With each removal, I felt the air clear, the grip loosen. Then I opened my bank account. Scanned through the recent transactions, then further back line after line of dates and numbers that told a story no one else thought I was paying attention to. That's when something caught my eye. A recurring transfer. 2 years old. A payment to a local roofing contractor. The memory stirred. Yes, the roof had been replaced, but I hadn't approved the job. I hadn't signed anything. I'd canceled Oregon that spring because the roof needed work, but I'd been the one planning to handle it to vet contractors to sign the dotted line. And yet here was the record customer Delara Holloway. The invoice was still stored in their online portal. I downloaded it, each line item sharp and damning. Deposit paid. Balance overdue. My pulse quickened, but my voice was steady when I dialed the contractor. "This is Delara Holloway," I said. "I have a billing question." The voice on the other end was warm, almost relieved. "Oh, sure, Miss Holloway. We were wondering when we'd hear from you again. We finished that project a while back. We were told you were handling the rest." The heat climbed my spine, but I kept my tone even. "I never ordered the work. I never even spoke to anyone from your office." There was a pause. Papers shuffled, keys tapped. Finally, the voice came back, hesitant now. "Well, your mother called on your behalf. She said you'd be covering the costs. The deposit was transferred from your joint family account. We assumed it was authorized." I closed my eyes. Not long enough to let the anger bloom, just long enough to keep it contained. "Please send me a copy of the signed authorization," I said. My voice didn't waver. "I need to review exactly what's on file." "Of course," he replied too quickly. I thanked him, ended the call, and sat there for a moment staring at the screen like it was daring me to crumble. But I didn't. I opened a new message instead. Recipient, my attorney. Subject, roof invoice. Body. This was done under my name without my consent. If they keep pushing this narrative in public, I'll respond with documentation every single time. I attached the invoice, the transfer confirmation, screenshots of the account history, line after line, proof stacked like bricks in a wall they couldn't climb over. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't post a rebuttal on Facebook. I didn't send a text demanding an explanation. No. This time my silence wasn't weakness. It was precision. And it was going to cut deeper than any of their words. Instead, I turned my phone off and placed it face down on the counter like I was setting down a burden I had carried far too long. Then I lit a single candle in the kitchen. The flame wavered, small but insistent, throwing shadows that stretched across the cabinets and tiled floor. I stood there watching it, letting the silence wrap around me like a second skin. And in that silence, I heard something truer than words: who I was becoming. Not the girl who bit her tongue until it bled just to keep the peace. Not the daughter who was expected to absorb disrespect because that's just how family is. Not the woman who let others define what she owed, who she was, or where she belonged. No, that version of me was gone. Burned down to ash. What stood in her place was someone steadier, sharper. Someone unwilling to play their script anymore. Later that night, just as I was about to shut the blinds, something caught my eye on the porch floor. A flash of white against the dark wood. I hesitated, then opened the door. It was an envelope. Crisp, heavy, deliberate. No stamp, no address. Just my name written in thick gold ink that glimmered under the porch light. Inside was a formal invitation card. "You are cordially invited to our home appreciation ceremony hosted by Maylis Holloway. Saturday, 2 p.m., light refreshments provided. The location listed, my house." For a long moment, I just stared. The cardstock was thick, expensive, the kind reserved for weddings, galas, or charity fundraisers. My name spelled correctly for once shimmered in that gaudy metallic ink like it was some kind of mockery. I didn't need to guess who ordered it. I knew. They weren't just hosting a gathering. They were staging a declaration printed in gold and black meant to make their claim feel real, public, unshakable. On paper in my home. I placed the card on the counter, turned the faucet on, and let the water run until steam curled upward. I watched the stream for nearly a full minute before shutting it off, then dried my hands on the same faded dish towel I'd used for years. That small, ordinary routine anchored me, reminded me that this was still my life. My kitchen, my ground. And I promised myself then I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of watching me unravel. Saturday came faster than I expected. By noon, 4 cars had already pulled up outside. SUVs mostly polished to a shine like they'd been scrubbed and detailed that very morning. A performance even before stepping inside. From the window, I saw Mrs. Handiwork. A beige welcome banner stretched across the front porch, the metallic lettering catching the sun, just enough to look polished, intentional. Subtle enough to pass as tasteful. Bold enough to be a statement. I felt the twist in my stomach, but I didn't flinch. I didn't want to be there, but I needed to be. I dressed plainly, jeans and a black sweater. Neutral, forgettable. My hair tied back, shoes soft enough not to echo on the hardwood. A deliberate invisibility. Because this time my presence wasn't for them. It was for me. To see, to hear, to remember. I waited until the hum of voices inside told me the guests had settled, until the first round of handshakes and compliments had died down. Long enough for the introductions to be over, but just before the performance of speeches began. Then I slipped through the side door. The house smelled faintly of perfume and catered food, a mix of roses and roasted garlic. The living room glowed with warm lamplight. I moved quietly to the archway between the kitchen and hallway, staying in the shadows, close enough to hear every word, but just far enough to remain unseen. That's when Iris stepped forward. In front of my fireplace, she tapped a spoon against her glass. The room hushed immediately, all eyes turning toward her. "Thank you all for coming." She began, her voice wrapped in that syrupy sweetness I knew too well. Performative. Polished. This home has meant so much to our family. And in the last few years, it has become even more special thanks to Melis. She gestured left and Miss glided forward. With her signature smile, that curated blend of humble and chic, the one she wore at open houses and networking brunches, she tilted her head just so, basking in borrowed light. And the room leaned in, ready to believe whatever story they spun next. She's the reason this space feels whole again. Iris continued, her tone rich with practiced sincerity. Her taste, her commitment, her heart. Every corner of this house reflects her strength and vision. A ripple of polite applause swept the room, glasses clinking faintly as hands came together. A woman in a silk blouse leaned toward her neighbor and whispered, "She deserves it after all her work." Another voice, male firm with certainty, chimed in. "I always knew she was the one holding everything together." The words hit like pebbles against glass. Not sharp enough to cut, but steady enough to crack. My gaze drifted toward the dining area. The my built-ins, the ones I had sketched out on graph paper, measured and sanded until my knuckles ached, stood proud beneath the soft glow of recessed lighting. The hand-painted tiles, the ones I'd driven across state lines to find, lay beneath their champagne flutes. Every single detail that drew their admiration had been born of my sweat, my decisions, my money. And yet none of that was named. None of it tied to me. Miss stepped forward, then a smile of modest perfection playing on her lips. "I just wanted to make the house feel more like home," she said sweetly. "That's all I ever wanted, to take what we had and make it beautiful." Her voice was gentle, deliberate, like she was giving the room a gift. And they believed her. That was the moment I felt a presence beside me. Solid. Grounded. A man in a dark navy suit, clean-shaven, his expression calm but unyielding. My attorney. He didn't look at me. Didn't ask permission. Just gave the smallest of nods, then stepped out from the shadows into the center of the room as if he'd been invited all along. "Excuse me," he said. Voice steady, not raised, but impossible to ignore. The crowd shifted, attention turning. Iris blinked in confusion. Mrs. Practice's smile faltered just slightly, like glass under pressure. Apologies for the interruption, he continued, holding up a manila folder in his hand. "But before this event proceeds, I am required to make a legal clarification." The air in the room grew taut, stretched thin. "This property," he said clearly, "is solely and legally owned by Ms. Delara Holloway. All records, tax documents, and deed filings list her as the only title holder. Any references, implications, or suggestions of shared ownership are legally incorrect and may constitute misrepresentation." The silence that followed was immediate, heavy. One man quietly set his glass down. A woman in heels shifted uncomfortably, the sound of her shoe scraping against the hardwood louder than it should have been. Miss said nothing. Iris opened her mouth, searching for words, but none came. That was when I stepped forward. Not to gloat. Not to argue. Simply to exist in the space they had tried to erase me from. I looked first at Miss, then at my mother. Their eyes darted away like moths avoiding flame. Neither could hold my gaze for long. "I never left this house," I said quietly, but each word landed with the weight of stone. "You just stopped seeing me in it." No one spoke. No one dared. And that was enough. I turned, walked out the front door, my attorney following behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The truth had already been planted like a flag in the center of the room. By the time I reached home, my real home, the sun had dropped lower, spilling honeyed light across the living room floor. I pulled the curtains open wide and let it flood in. No shadows. No disguises. I brewed a cup of coffee, the sound of the kettle steadying me, and sat at the kitchen table. I drank slowly, savoring the quiet. For the first time in weeks, the silence wasn't an absence. It was mine. The next morning was quiet in a different way. The kind of quiet that settles over a battlefield once the smoke has cleared. I moved through the house barefoot slow, deliberate, touching the furniture like it had returned from exile. Everything was in its place, yet everything felt changed, finally wholly mine. In the living room, I spotted a crumpled napkin on the floor, a leftover relic from the intrusion. I picked it up, smoothed it absently between my fingers, then tossed it in the bin. In the sink, a few plastic cups remained dull and cheap. I rinsed them out and stacked them neatly, one last cleanup for a mess that was never mine. Behind the armchair, I found a handbag forgotten or abandoned. I didn't bother to open it. I simply carried it to the porch, placed it on the step, and tucked a small note inside. Left behind. Come get it if it's yours. No signature. No explanation. When I stepped back inside and closed the door, the air felt different. Lighter. Not just legally mine, but emotionally, spiritually. The walls no longer echoed with accusation. The silence no longer pressed down like judgment. Instead, it settled around me gently like a breath finally released. By mid-afternoon, I found myself back at the kitchen table, pen in hand. I hadn't meant to write anything, but the words came easily, like they had been waiting patient for me to finally make space for them. Not long, just true. That was all I wrote. I understand now. You didn't want me invisible. You wanted me useful. I forgive you, but I won't forget. No flourish, no excess. Just truth carved down to its core. At the bottom, instead of my name, I signed a single initial D. I folded the note in half, slid it into a plain ivory card with no picture, no pattern, no color. Blank. Unsentimental. It felt fitting, stripped of all decoration, like the way I had finally stripped away the weight they'd draped over me for years. On the drive over, I didn't rehearse, didn't debate, didn't linger in second thoughts. I parked in front of their house, stepped out into the cold evening air, and walked straight to the mailbox. No knock, no waiting, no pause for nerves. I placed the card inside, closed the lid, and left. By the time I got home, the sky had dimmed to a quiet gray. I made tea, wrapped myself in a thick blanket, and carried the mug out to the front steps. The porcelain was warm against my palms, anchoring me as the cold crept around my shoulders. The air smelled faintly of pine smoke from someone's fireplace down the street. An hour passed. Stillness wrapped the neighborhood until my phone vibrated. A message from Mace. You didn't have to humiliate everyone like that. We could have handled it as family. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, let the words register, then pressed block. No reply. No explanation. No rage. Just done. Her message wasn't about truth. It was about control. She wasn't upset that I spoke, she was upset it wasn't hers to tell. That night, I left every light off except for the candle in the hallway. The same one I had lit the night I chose to stop being silent. Its flame flickered against the walls as I sat again on the porch, wrapped in my blanket, letting the cold December wind sting my cheeks. The neighborhood had started to shift with the season. Porch rails dressed in strands of twinkling lights, wreaths on doors, the faint sound of carols playing from somewhere down the block. Across the street, Mrs. Platt wrestled with an inflatable snowman, her son crouched at the base, securing it with string. She caught me watching, lifted a hand to wave. I waved back, and for the first time in a while, the gesture didn't feel forced. Before bed, I sent a message to Camille thanks for reminding me I could choose myself. I should have done it sooner. Her reply came within minutes. You chose right on time. The next morning, when I opened the door to fetch the newspaper, I saw another envelope waiting on the doormat. Different this time. Thinner, neatly sealed my name, written in careful, even handwriting. I knew it was from Camille before I even bent to pick it up. I sat down on the edge of the couch and opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph, slightly faded but well kept. My breath caught as I recognized it instantly, 10 years ago, a family cookout. The only picture where I had been at the center. Camille must have taken it. In the photo, I was laughing, holding a paper plate heavy with ribs, sunlight falling across my hair. On either side of me, my mother and mice were turned toward something else, someone else, their attention elsewhere, as it always had been. But I was looking straight into the camera. Not posing, not performing, just present. And for once, the image didn't feel like a memory I had to claw back. It felt like proof. Proof that even then, even in the years when they tried to write me out, I had always been there. They just chose to frame the picture without me. I traced my fingers lightly across the edges of the photograph. Not to cling, not to ache, but simply to remind myself I was there. I have always been there. On the back in Camille's small, deliberate handwriting were 6 words that landed deeper than any apology: you were never invisible. Just surrounded. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't touch me, but because it touched a place so deep that tears would have been too shallow a response. The truth didn't sting, it soothed. I folded the photo carefully, set it beside me on the couch, and stood to make coffee. 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. No, it wasn't a knock. Just a soft shift of presence, the faint sound of footsteps on my porch. I opened the door and there was Camille holding up 2 paper coffee cups, her smile quiet but steady. I opened the door wide enough for her to come in. She handed me the coffee with both hands like it was something more than just a cup. A small peace offering maybe, or just a reminder that some people show up without needing to be asked. I led her out to the porch and we settled into the 2 old chairs that had lived there longer than they should have. I almost threw them out last spring, tired of their splintering arms and worn cushions, but now I was grateful I hadn't. They creaked under our weight, like they too were relieved to still belong. We sat in silence for a while. No rush to fill the air. The wind dragged dry leaves across the street in lazy, scraping arcs, and every so often a car passed headlights washing briefly over the porch before vanishing again. The world felt quiet, stripped down to the essentials breath-warmth presence. Finally, Camille spoke, her voice low and steady. "You won't get an apology," she said, "but you'll get distance. And sometimes, that's something." I wrapped my hands tighter around the cup and nodded. I don't need them to say sorry. I just needed them to stop rewriting my life like I wasn't even in it. She gave a slow nod, the kind that carried understanding instead of agreement. "Then you did it. You took the pen back. We didn't linger much longer. She had her own world to return to, and I had mine to rebuild." When she left, I sat there a few minutes more tracing circles around the cardboard sleeve of the coffee cup until the warmth faded. Then I went inside, pulled my old laptop from the back of the desk drawer, and pressed the power button. It groaned awake, sluggish and unfamiliar, like a relic from a past life. I hadn't opened it since before all this began. But something about the night told me it was time to clean things out, to close files, to delete noise. Most of the folders were what I expected: receipts, photos, half-written drafts of emails I never sent. But as the last few files backed up, I noticed one I didn't remember creating, labeled simply, House Legal. Out of habit, I clicked. I expected dull PDFs I'd already archived. Instead, a subfolder opened with screenshots, scanned documents, email threads that carried my name like a watermark. There was the original deed, statements from the mortgage company, even a copy of the renovation contract with my initials scribbled faintly at the corner. And scattered among them, emails Miss had uploaded herself. It wasn't an accident. She hadn't been misinformed. She hadn't been confused. She had been waiting for me to sit still, to fold in on myself, to believe I didn't have the power to move. She wasn't careless. She was patient, calculated, manipulative. The discovery didn't spark rage. It didn't even sting. It just clarified something I'd been circling for months. Miss had played the long game. She thought I would never have the nerve to flip the board. I closed the laptop, gently unplugged it, and slid it back into the drawer. Then I walked the house, not searching for anything new, but just letting my eyes land on what was already mine. The hallway still painted in the soft eggshell white I'd chosen myself. The guest room blue as the sky after rain, even though my mother had once called the color depressing. The window trim smooth beneath my fingertips because I had sanded it by hand. The cabinet handles I had installed at 2 a.m. when sleep refused to come. All mine. Every corner a record of me, of work no one could erase. That evening, as dusk slipped quietly into night and houses across the street began to glow with strands of holiday lights, I lit a single candle on the mantel. Next to it, I placed the photo Camille had given me, tucked carefully into a simple wooden frame. It sat beneath a small stack of books and a ceramic vase I'd bought years ago from a roadside market. Something ordinary, something that now felt quietly precious. I didn't look at the photo again. I didn't need to. The house no longer ached the way it once had. It no longer carried the heavy silence of stolen belonging. It felt honest, still mine. The next morning, I opened the mailbox and found a thin envelope from the city's property records office. Inside was a single notice Mace had filed a change of address. No goodbye, no text, no letter, just gone. And as I stood there on the porch, the paper trembling lightly in my hand, I felt no satisfaction, no smug vindication. Only peace. Because while they had left with the stories they built around themselves, I remained with something far stronger. The truth, the home, and the life that was mine all along. The truth, my name. And a silence that wasn't born from being pushed out, but from finally closing the door myself. For years, they had tried to erase me in whispers, with omissions, with carefully chosen pauses. But in the end, I found my place in the story, claimed it, framed it, and carried it forward. I used to believe silence was strength. That if I stayed quiet, if I kept the peace, if I poured more of myself into the cracks than I ever received back, maybe they would finally see me. But I understand now, not all silence is peace. Sometimes silence is an eraser slowly rubbing away your outline until you're no longer visible even to yourself. And strength doesn't always look like shouting. It doesn't always look like slamming doors or winning arguments. Sometimes strength is a steady hand drawing a boundary gently, firmly, and then refusing to let anyone shift it again. It's choosing not to fight on their terms, but to stand on your own. You don't need revenge to win. You don't need validation to exist. Sometimes the greatest victory is living fully in your truth, even if you are the only one who knows it. Even if no one claps, even if no one ever says you were right. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family. If you've ever believed that your worth depended only on what you could give or on how useful you could be. Hear me when I say this. Your story matters. It matters even if they never acknowledge it. It matters even if they rewrite it 1,000 times without you. And most of all, you matter. You have the right to take up space in your own life. You have the right to be seen. So let me ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity? Have you ever been written out of someone else's story only to discover the strength to write your own? If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. Let me know I'm not the only one who's walked this road. Or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled, whose hearts it has reached. And if this story didn't quite land for you, that's okay too. Tell me why. Tell me what you would have wanted to hear differently. Because your perspective matters here too. Above all, if you believe in stories that heal, stories that challenge, stories that reflect the messy, beautiful truth of real life, don't forget to subscribe. That way you won't miss the next one. Who knows, maybe the story waiting just ahead is the one that finds you exactly at the moment you need it most. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until next time.